My name is Alara, and I used to be that girl in school that everyone ignored. I had no parents, no money, and no pretty clothes. The only thing that made me stand out from the crowd was this face, which was passable. But it was this face that made me a thorn in their side. The three of them, Veronica, Tiffany, and Scarlett, were the most dazzling presences in the school. Veronica was their leader, beautiful and from a privileged family, walking with the wind at her back. Tiffany and Scarlett were her followers, one responsible for coming up with ideas, the other for taking action. They were always together, pointing at me and gossiping, mocking me for being a poor orphan. At first, they just said a few nasty things about me behind my back. But gradually they started bullying me openly. One day, I had just put my bag down when I smelled a foul stench. My hands trembling, I opened my bag, and a dead rat was lying inside, its eyes still wide open. I burst into tears on the spot, but they laughed and said, "Alara, look at you, you're so pathetic, it's disgusting. Alara, look at you, you're so pathetic, it's disgusting." Their methods became more and more ruthless. One time, I had just entered the toilet when the door was locked from the outside. I pounded on the door in terror, but their laughter came from outside. When the door finally opened, I found that my skirt had been torn, revealing my underwear. They took out their phones and took a barrage of pictures of me, saying they were going to post them online and ruin my life. The most despairing thing for me was that time in the shower. I had just taken off my clothes when the door was pushed open. Veronica and the others stood at the door, taking pictures of me with their phones. I covered my body in terror, but they showed no mercy and sneered. "Oh, Alara, your figure is pretty good. Do you want us to help you promote it?" I cried and begged them to let me go, but they laughed and walked away. I thought it was over, but they escalated. One day after school, I had just walked into a small alley near the school when I was blocked by a few thugs. Their eyes were lecherous, their breath reeked of alcohol, and they started to touch me. I struggled desperately, but couldn't move. I looked up in despair and saw Veronica and the others standing at the entrance of the alley, with cold smiles on their faces, as if they were enjoying a good show. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. When I woke up again, I was lying in darkness. I touched my face, cold and without warmth, and realized that I was dead, and my soul was floating in the air above the school. I looked down at the familiar school campus, my heart full of resentment. Those who bullied me were still running rampant on campus. I heard the students talking, saying that the school had dealt with those thugs, but Veronica and the others had only had their parents pay some money. They also said that it was my own promiscuous behavior that had brought such misfortune upon myself. My heart was filled with resentment. On the night of my seventh-day soul return, the resentment in my heart exploded instantly. A powerful force poured into my body like a flood, as if to tear me apart. Under the impact of this force, a blood-red dress appeared out of thin air on my body like a ghost, its color as bright as fresh blood, as if telling of my grievances and resentment. My hair also became more disheveled in an instant, like a tangled mess of weeds blown by a strong wind, flying wildly, and my eyes glowed with a horrifying red light, as if they could drip blood. I knew that at that moment, I had completely transformed into a vengeful ghost. I first came to Veronica's dormitory. In the dormitory, the lights were dim, and Veronica and her two roommates were lying on the bed, chatting and laughing while eating snacks, enjoying their own happy time. However, they were completely unaware of my arrival, and were still immersed in their own world. I stood at the door, quietly watching them, the resentment in my heart burning like a flame. I gently waved my sleeve, and an invisible force instantly swept in from outside the window. Immediately afterwards, the corpses of animals flew in from outside the window, filling their beds, wardrobes, and bags. These corpses were bloody and smelled disgusting. Veronica and the others screamed in terror, their voices echoing in the dormitory, as if they could break through the roof. However, this was just the beginning. Before they could recover from the shock, I used my ghostly powers to display large, bright red characters on the wall. "I'm back. I'm back." The blood-red handwriting was like a demon's curse, sending shivers down their spines. Veronica and the others were so frightened that their souls almost left their bodies, and they scrambled out of the dormitory. However, how could I easily let them go? I used my ghost wall technique to trap them in place. No matter how they ran, they could only turn around in place, as if trapped in a maze from which they could never escape. Finally, the terrified Veronica and the others rushed into the toilet in a panic. I followed them into the toilet, a small and dark space, the air filled with the smell of dampness and decay. I floated in front of them like a ghost, my transparent body looking particularly eerie in the dim light. My eyes were cold and resentful, with a sneer on the corner of my mouth, as if I were a messenger of revenge crawling out of hell. Veronica, Tiffany, and Scarlett stood there, their faces as white as paper, their eyes filled with horror and disbelief. Their legs were trembling non-stop, as if they would collapse to the ground at any moment. Veronica tried to back away, but was blocked by the cubicle behind her. She looked at me in terror, her lips trembling, unable to even utter a complete sentence. "Aren't you dead?" Tiffany finally squeezed out these words, her voice shaking like a sieve. I sneered, my voice echoing in the small space. "Yes, I'm dead. But did you think you could get rid of me so easily?" I slowly approached them, leaving a faint blood-colored footprint on the ground with each step. My gaze was fixed on Veronica. She was the source of all my pain, the greatest resentment in my heart. I raised my hand, my sharp ghost claws flashing with a cold light in the dim light. I said to them in a cold voice, "Didn't you think it was fun to bully me? Now it's your turn to be afraid." After saying that, I suddenly waved my ghost claws and slashed at Veronica. My movements were as fast as lightning, and Veronica had no time to react at all, only letting out a piercing scream. My ghost claws pierced her body, instantly tearing her clothes to shreds, blood spurting out like a spring, staining the entire toilet red. Veronica's body was torn into several pieces, her internal organs scattered all over the floor, and blood splattered on the walls and floor. Her screams echoed in the small space, sending chills down people's spines. Tiffany next to her had long been frightened into a faint by this bloody scene, and she collapsed to the ground, motionless. And Scarlett looked at everything in terror, her body trembling nonstop, her eyes filled with fear. I turned my head and looked at Scarlett, the sneer at the corner of my mouth even more pronounced. "Did you think that little amulet could protect you for the rest of your life?" Scarlett suddenly took out an amulet from her arms and shouted loudly, "Don't come over. I have this, you can't hurt me." The amulet was flickering with a faint light in her hand, and it seemed that there really was a mysterious force protecting her. I tried to approach her, but found that I couldn't touch her. My ghost power seemed to be neutralized by the amulet. I sighed helplessly, watching Scarlett flee the scene in terror. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, gradually fading away. Although I didn't manage to finish off Scarlett with my own hands, I didn't give up. I left my aura on her body. No matter where she went, I could sense her location, and she could never escape my pursuit. I turned around and looked at Tiffany lying on the ground. She was still unconscious, her face full of horror and despair. I squatted down, brought my face close to hers and said in a cold voice, "Wake up, your nightmare has just begun." Tiffany slowly opened her eyes, and when she saw my cold and resentful face, she screamed in terror. I sneered, raised my hand, and the ghost claws flashed with cold light again. I suddenly waved my ghost claws and slashed at her neck. Tiffany's neck was instantly torn open, blood spurting out, her body convulsing violently, and soon she was silent. I stood up, looked at the blood and corpses all over the floor, and felt an unspeakable sense of relief in my heart. Those who had bullied me in the past had finally received their due retribution. My resentment was released at this moment, but my heart was still full of coldness and darkness. I knew that this was only the beginning. I had more revenge to take, and more people had to pay for my past pain. After dealing with these two bullies, there was still a lingering resentment in my heart. I thought of Ms. Wallace, who had stood by and watched me being bullied without saying a word. She always used the excuse of being busy with teaching duties to turn a blind eye to the evil deeds on campus, only symbolically criticizing them a few times after the incident, and then quickly wrapping things up. Regarding my experiences, she was even more indifferent, never standing up for justice. I decided to make Ms. Wallace pay the price for her indifference. I quietly infiltrated her dreams. While she was asleep, my ghost quietly invaded her dreamland. In her dream, Ms. Wallace was standing in a magnificent hall. The hall was filled with people in gorgeous clothes, all with flattering smiles on their faces, holding thick envelopes in their hands, vying to stuff them into her hands. She smiled as she took it, the banknotes in the envelope making a crisp sound. She was wearing a brand new business suit, with a shiny metal pin to her chest, which read, "Excellent teacher." She looked around and saw the director of education approaching her with a smile, holding a large certificate, saying, "Miss Wallace, you have made a great contribution to education. This is a small reward for you." She happily accepted the certificate, calculating in her mind how to use the money to buy a large house and get promoted, so that everyone would envy her. The moment I appeared, Ms. Wallace suddenly felt the surrounding air become ice cold, and the lively hall instantly became deathly silent. She slowly turned her head, and saw me floating like a ghost in front of her. I was wearing that blood-red dress, my hair was scattered over my shoulders, and my face was full of resentment and coldness. My eyes were like sharp swords, piercing straight into the depths of her heart. "You. Who are you, Miss?" Wallace's voice was trembling, and her face instantly turned pale. I let out a cold laugh, my voice echoing in the hall. "Miss Wallace, don't you recognize me? I'm Alara, the girl you bullied to the point of being half dead." Miss Wallace looked at me in horror, wanting to run away, but found that her body could not move at all. She could only watch me approach step by step, each step making a creak sound on the ground, as if the whole world was clearing the way for me. "Miss Wallace, didn't you like watching the show? Then take a good look again." My voice was cold and eerie, and a strange smile hung on the corner of my mouth. I slowly raised my hand, sharp ghost claws shining coldly in the light, with traces of blood still remaining. "Miss Wallace shouted in terror. "No, please no." But her voice grew weaker and weaker, as if swallowed by an invisible force. I continued to approach, staring at her with resentful eyes, and said, "You watched me being bullied when you were alive and turned a blind eye. Now, let you also taste the feeling of being bullied." After speaking, the ghost claws in my hand ruthlessly pierced her, instantly piercing her body. She let out a miserable scream, and blood instantly stained the entire dream red. Her body began to gradually collapse, turning into countless drops of blood, splashing everywhere. I looked at her gradually disappearing body, and the resentment in my heart was finally released. I whispered in her ear, "Miss Wallace, this is the ending you deserve." Then, I turned into a gust of wind, and disappeared into this dream full of fear and blood. The next morning, when Miss Wallace's family found her, they saw her eyes wide open, her face full of fear, and she was already dead. In the days that followed, I waited for the opportunity to return on the 14th day after death, preparing to launch the final revenge against Scarlet. During this time, I continued to cultivate my ghost power, making my strength even stronger. At the same time, I also secretly observed Scarlet's every move, and found that her parents, in order to protect her, had specially hired a monk and a Taoist priest, who stayed by her side day and night, chanting scriptures and praying for blessings to ward off evil spirits. The night of the 14th day after death finally arrived, and I rushed towards Scarlet's house, radiating powerful ghostly energy all over my body. The moonlight was like blood, sprinkled on my blood-red dress, adding even more eeriness and horror. At the gate of Scarlet's house, a monk and a Taoist priest had been waiting for a long time, holding fly whisks and swords, staring at me with firm eyes, like two mountains, blocking my path to revenge. The fly whisk in the monk's hand turned into countless golden lights, like golden snakes dancing wildly, rushing straight to my face. The Taoist priest's sword also emitted a dazzling light. The tip of the sword pointed directly at my heart, and mysterious runes flowed around the sword body, emitting a powerful spiritual energy fluctuation. They chanted incantations in their mouths, but I was not afraid. I roared angrily and rushed towards them. My ghost claws flashed with a faint cold light, each swing carrying a powerful resentment and ghostly aura, cutting through the air and making a sharp whistling sound, aiming directly at the vitals of the monk and the Taoist priest. Seeing this, the monk waved the fly whisk in his hand sharply, and a thick golden light, like a dragon emerging from the sea, went straight to my ghost claws. The golden light and the ghost claws collided fiercely in the air, making a deafening sound. The powerful energy fluctuations distorted the surrounding air, and the dust on the ground was lifted into the air, as if the whole world was trembling for this battle. The Taoist priest was not to be outdone, and with a wave of his sword, a sword light, like a meteor chasing the moon, pierced straight into my forehead. I quickly dodged. The sword light brushed past my cheek, leaving a blood stain on my face, and blood instantly stained my face red. The anger in my heart grew even stronger, and resentment poured out of my body like a substance, surrounding me in a blood-colored area. I rushed towards the Taoist priest again, the ghost claws with blood-colored afterimages, grabbing straight at his throat. Seeing me coming fiercely, the Taoist priest quickly waved his sword to block. The sword and the ghost claws intersected, making a crisp metallic clanging sound, and the Taoist priest's hand was shaken, and the sword almost fell off. The monk's fly whisk attacked again, and I had to divide some of my strength to resist. For a time, only golden light, sword light, and blood-colored afterimages were intertwined on the battlefield. The attacks of both sides came and went, making it difficult to distinguish the winner. However, my resentment was too deep, and the ghostly aura was constantly expanding. Every time I was injured, I could recover quickly, and my strength was even stronger. After a fierce battle, I gradually gained the upper hand. The attacks of the monk and the Taoist priest began to weaken, and their faces also turned pale, obviously consuming a lot of physical strength and spiritual energy. At this moment, the monk suddenly chanted a spell, and the fly whisk in his hand turned into a huge golden light net, covering me head-on. The Taoist priest also took the opportunity to wave his sword, and the sword turned into a shocking sword aura, piercing straight into the back of my heart. Sensing the murderous intent behind me, I quickly turned around, and the ghost's claws collided with the sword aura in the air, making a loud noise. I was knocked back and spat out a mouthful of blood, plowing a deep gully on the ground when I landed. Seeing that the opportunity could not be missed, the monk and the Taoist priest quickly chanted spells, and the fly whisk and the sword in their hands simultaneously emitted a dazzling light. The two powerful lights converged into a huge pillar of light, shooting straight at me. Although I was injured, I still fought hard. The ghostly aura formed a blood-colored barrier around me, trying to resist this powerful attack. However, the power of the light column was too strong, and the blood-colored barrier gradually weakened under the impact of the light, and was eventually shattered. I let out a miserable scream, and my body was hit by the light column. Instantly bound by the powerful force, unable to move, my body was hung high, suspended in the air, unable to move. The monk and the Taoist priest took the opportunity to chant spells, and golden runes flew out of their hands, sticking to my body, sealing my power. Alara, you evil spirit, today we will make you unable to be reincarnated forever. The monk shouted loudly, and the fly whisk in his hand waved again, a golden light shooting at my forehead, trying to completely destroy my soul. My heart was filled with unwillingness and anger, but my body was firmly bound, unable to break free. Just when I thought I was going to fail completely, Scarlet came out of the house and sneered at me. Alara, haven't you always been so weak? What, now that you've become a ghost, you think you're very powerful? Don't dream, you'll never be able to beat us. Her words instantly evoked all the memories of being bullied by them in my life, and those scenes of humiliation, pain, and despair flooded my mind like a tide. My resentment erupted like a volcano, and the ghostly aura instantly shattered the light pillars and runes of the monk and the Taoist priest. I let out a earth-shattering roar, and the ghostly aura around my body surged wildly, forming a powerful force that shattered all the light pillars and runes that bound me. The monk and the Taoist priest looked at me in horror. The fly whisk and the sword in their hands had lost their effect. Their faces were full of sweat and horror, and their eyes were filled with fear. The fly whisk in the monk's hand trembled constantly, and the Taoist priest's sword also fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. They wanted to retreat, but they were bound by their own fear and could not move. I took the opportunity to rush forward and used all my strength to knock them away. My ghost claws flashed like lightning, carrying powerful ghostly aura and resentment, and hit their chests hard. The monk and the Taoist priest let out a miserable scream, and their bodies flew out like rag dolls, hitting the wall behind them, dust and debris splashing everywhere. They slipped to the ground, blood overflowing from the corners of their mouths, their eyes filled with despair and unwillingness. Aren't you going to catch ghosts and exorcise evil spirits? What's wrong now? I looked at them with a sneer, my voice full of ridicule and anger. I slowly walked towards them, each step carrying a powerful sense of oppression, making them feel suffocated. My ghostly aura churned around, forming a powerful storm, tightly surrounding them. The monk and the Taoist priest tried to struggle to get up, but found that their whole body was weak, and they could not move at all. They could only watch me approach, their faces full of fear and helplessness. I stopped in front of them, looking down at them, my eyes full of resentment and coldness. You so-called righteous people are nothing more than this. I smiled contemptuously, then turned and rushed toward Scarlet. Scarlet's face no longer showed the arrogance of the past, only endless fear. She wanted to escape, but was trapped in place by my ghostly power. Her eyes were filled with horror and despair, her body trembled constantly, and tears welled up in her eyes. Looking at her terrified eyes, I said with a sneer, "Scarlet, haven't you always been very rampant? You know what fear is now. It's too late." My ghost claws mercilessly slashed across her body. She let out a scream, and blood instantly stained her clothes red. She tried to resist, but found that she could not break free from my ghostly power at all. "No. Don't." Scarlet's voice was full of begging and fear, and her eyes were full of tears. "It's useless for you to beg me." My voice was cold and ruthless, and my ghost claws slashed across her body again. Her clothes were torn, revealing the skin inside, which was covered with bloodstains and scars. She screamed and screamed, her body convulsing nonstop. Looking at her painful appearance, my heart was filled with the pleasure of revenge. I blew on her face with a cold breath, making her feel even more fear and despair. My ghost claws left deep wounds on her body, blood constantly flowing, staining the surrounding ground red. Why are you doing this to me?" Scarlet's voice was full of pain and incomprehension, and her eyes were full of tears. "Why?" I sneered. "Because you once bullied me, humiliated me, and made me live worse than death. Now, I'm just letting you taste the pain you once inflicted on others." Hearing my words, Scarlet's face showed a trace of regret and fear. She realized how cruel and unforgivable her past actions were. However, now everything was too late. My ghost claws slashed across her body again. She let out a scream, and died instantly. Her body fell in a pool of blood, her eyes filled with unwillingness and fear. Revenge was finally complete. But there was no liberation in my heart as I had imagined, only an empty and confused feeling. I looked up at the night sky, the stars twinkling, but I could no longer feel the warmth of this world. And so, I turned and drifted towards the school's dormitory building, the place that had once witnessed my countless humiliations and pain. From then on, I became the dormitory's vengeful ghost in red, a part of the school's eerie stories. Whenever the night was deep and quiet, students would claim to see a girl in a long blood-red dress wandering in the dormitory building, sometimes emitting a mournful cry, sometimes emitting a sinister laugh, shrouding the entire campus in an atmosphere of terror.